August 27th, 2024. Well, I want to address the ongoing situation in the Russia-Ukraine war. Um, I think we've had a few developments since the last time I really kind of got into it in any depth, and so we'll do that. But I also want to mention at the end of this, I want to make a few comments about the ongoing investigation of the attempted assassination of former President Trump as well. So that'll be toward the end of this. But first off, in the situation with the Ukraine war, if you want to call it that, and particularly their incursion into the Kursk region of Russia, um, I think that we're now approaching basically 3 weeks into that, and at this point, it looks as if the offensive has kind of run out of gas, so to speak. At this point, the Russians have managed to move sufficient forces into the area to kind of surround the whole incursion and block any major additional advances at the moment. There are some positional battles going on, and there's some in which the Ukrainians may make some marginal advances, or then occasionally being pushed back in other areas. But it looks like they're fully engaged now, whereas in the early, certainly during the first few days of this thing, there was such a scarcity of any real Russian opposition that the small units of Ukrainian mobile forces were pretty much running freely and doing whatever they wanted. I'm not so I guess there are areas now where there's a pretty solid base of defense, and there are a few excursions that have sort of sprung out. Um, I'm not so clear that all the things they show on the maps that you'll see if you follow this, or when they say it's completely held by one side or the other. It looks to me like it's still kind of, there's certainly a degree to which it's kind of fluid, and anybody can find themselves bypassed by the other side depending on where they are. So that's kind of the situation now, and it is turning into kind of what I've characterized it as sort of an analogy to the World War II Battle of the Bulge, with the Ukrainians playing the role of Germans here. Of course, and the Russians, I guess, are playing the role of the Americans and the British, kind of in a sense, because what you have going on is that the other parts of the conflict, I would say that the one toward Kharkiv is basically a static situation, both sides clashing with each other, but neither side making much of an advance. And of course, in the rest of the conflict, particularly in the Donbas, the Russians are actually moving ahead pretty steadily. This whole thing hasn't really affected that to any significant degree that I can tell. And in fact, well, in the sense of slowing the Russians down. On the other hand, it's kind of gave them some momentum, because essentially elite units that had been used to block Russian advances have now been deployed into the Kursk encounter, and so the restraints that were there are not quite what they were. By the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like. It definitely helps with the algorithm. You can subscribe. We're looking for more subscriptions on YouTube, and of course, if you're on Rumble instead, and you get it through one of my postings, you can always subscribe to me on Rumble. So anyhow, so that's kind of the situation. Effectively, what you have to look at is that the standard Ukrainian strategy has been that you have what they call like territorial defense units and other static defense units, which occupy defensive trenches and fortifications that they've built up. And then behind them are mobile elite units of highly motivated and better equipped Ukrainian forces using the various armored vehicles that are being provided by NATO powers, US, Germany, and so forth. And the strategy was, when the Russians launch an attack in a particular area where it's really threatening to break through, these mobile units will then come in and counterattack and block the advances. But now these elite units have pretty much all been pulled away from the front down in the eastern part of the country, and now they're moving into Kursk, and no wonder they've done pretty good. These are some of the best units the Ukrainians have, and they had some of the best equipment. And you see a fair amount of HIMARS missile launchers being used in this thing, for instance. You have a lot of artillery and armored vehicles. And so this is give the very lightly equipped Russians who were there in the initial events a real run for their money. But now there's been a substantial deployment of Russian units. I don't think many have been pulled off of the front in the east, but there were probably units like one unit of naval infantry that was going to be deployed in one of the major battles simply was diverted up there, but it had never been deployed. So it was a fresh unit, for example. And a lot of other units, I think, were basically part of a planned Russian offensive that probably wouldn't occur until winter, early winter, probably. But which I said, that in some senses, you could view this as a preemptive effort by the Ukrainians. But the other point, it sounds to me to be a kind of a desperation move of sorts. I mean, as it was before this was launched, the Russians were steadily advancing in the Pokrovsk, I think is how it's pronounced, which is a major supply hub. And if that's taken, that'll really undermine a lot of the logistics of the Donbas front line and probably will allow the Russians to, in a period of months, pretty much collapse that whole front. And the fortifications after that are pretty minimal. So there's the possibility that the Russians would then be able to eventually move even toward the river, the Dnieper River. So, and I doubt they're going to go much beyond that. At least not this year. And I don't even know if they're going to get that far. But with all these elite units and their drones and stuff diverted, their electronic warfare, the Russians are starting to have kind of a field day in the east. And it's kind of interesting that they chose to do this. Now, one of the big discussions is, to what degree is the United States or NATO behind it? And of course, this early on, we tried to act as if we had nothing to do with it, that this was just Ukraine going off on their own. And to some degree, this may be partly true. That there could be elements of the government that was behind it, and other elements that maybe really weren't in the loop, perhaps. One would tend to think that the British might have a lot to do with this too. That seems to be their kind of thing. But on the long run, it's more. It seems like it's going to have more of a propaganda impact than a strategic impact. And so over time, one would expect the Russians are going to push them back out, and then probably go ahead and advance towards Sumy once they've accomplished that. But I think Putin has mentioned a target date of October the 1st. To deal with the situation. So this is going to be going on for quite a while, I think. But by the time it's over, there should be a lot of damage to some of the best Ukrainian units, which will put them overall in a much worse environment by the wintertime. Furthermore, the Russians now, they were supposed to launch a major missile strike on the 24th of August, the Ukrainian Independence Day, but they didn't do it. That sounds to me that was a pretty wise move on their side. They waited to the 26th and then launched it. And apparently they're targeting, again, going back to targeting energy and even water supplies and a variety of military targets. So allegedly they hit something associated with the F-16s. But as far as we can tell, at least at this time, it wasn't actually an aircraft, but maybe some equipment associated with them, or perhaps weapons that were going to be deployed on the aircraft. It's some warehouse that they blew up. And so, because I think the general concept on the F-16s is that they'll only base out of Romania, then they'll fly into a forward base somewhere in Ukraine and then refuel and arm, then go launch their attack, and then fly back to Romania for servicing. I think that seems to be the plan of operations for the F-16s. So anyhow, and there have been instances where airstrikes have been delivered against Russian positions around Kursk, presumably with, I've heard, MiG-29s carrying Western either JDAM or this French hammer bomb. So that's both are guided glide bombs that we use in the NATO world, so to speak. So anyhow, that kind of is the situation, and it will continue for a while. There's still a possibility on the west there, that there could be a vulnerability there still, although, and there's been a lot, 3 bridges were knocked out trying to knock out the logistics of the Russians that are on the front line in that part of the, the conflict to the west of the Kursk incursion up to the Ukrainian border. There's like a pocket in there. But it's also true that the Russians have been building pontoon bridges, and I tend to think that, uh, based on history of like, say, going back to the Yom Kippur War when the Israelis tried to bomb the Egyptian pontoon bridges across the Suez Canal, and they hit several of them, but the problem was they were you not destroy a section, but not the whole bridge. Then you just bring in new sections and rebuild them. And I think so. I'm not sure they're going to be able to really cut off that area, but it is an area where there are Ukrainian reserves inside of Ukraine that could be deployed that haven't been as of this recording. So that's an area that the Russians will have to watch out for. The problem with this conflict, since it's fluid, you can easily get too far forward without adequate support and find yourself in a bind, no matter which side you're on, and that's what's been happening. But all in all, I think this was kind of a crazy move. I almost sort of tend to believe it was more a Ukrainian move than a U.S. authored move. I mean, maybe there were elements of the CIA or something that thought it was a good idea, or maybe the British. This is the kind of thing the British would kind of encourage, I think. But at any rate, militarily, I think it's probably not the best move. There is some thought this is all about trying to seize some territory and negotiate, but so far it looks like the Russians aren't biting, and so it is. Well, that's the state of play on that. We'll probably be seeing more of weaponry that might be deployed on the F-16s. I've heard of some discussion that JASSM missiles might be introduced, but there's no word that's really been done yet. If they are, they'll probably be introduced by surprise, maybe that was what was in that warehouse that the Russians bombed. We don't know. So, at any rate, getting on to the other issue I announced at the beginning on the Trump assassination attempt and the investigation. The following facts seem to be pretty clear now. We know that Kursk, was the shooter. I think that's pretty clear cut. The multiple shooters, the water tower, all that stuff is nonsense. He did get off 8 rounds, and then 2 rounds were fired. One to hit him, one by a police sniper that apparently has hit his rifle, and the other one was a kill shot by the Secret Service sniper, team number 2. So that much is clear. But the mystery now is that what was on those encrypted accounts that he was communicating with somebody. Who was he communicating with, and what were they telling him? That's something that's being held back by the FBI and apparently hasn't been forwarded yet. There's still apparently one other encrypted site that they haven't been able to get into yet. The other interesting development is that Kursk's father has apparently retained one of the most prestigious lawyers in Pennsylvania and considered in the top 50 nationwide. And the question is, how can a person of modest means be paying the fees for an attorney of that caliber? And why does he need an attorney of that caliber? I mean, they're looking for who was Kursk's accomplice, who was his trainer, and well, we don't know. Could it have been a family member, or is it somebody outside? Was it some people he supposedly had some issues, but his social media footprint is very sparse. I guess you don't have an Instagram account or a TikTok account, or let alone say something like X or whatever. I mean, there is some rumors that he might have been on Gab at one time, but that was quite a while back. And now there's a bunch of other things that is being discussed, and it looks like they're doubting that really it was him. It might have been his father that was on there. So it's saying who knows what. I mean, there still is a bit of suspicion about what could be going on with him. But it looks like it isn't so much that the question is, did he have help, and if so, who was that? Was there, there is the discussion that there were some strange visitors from, one from D.C. area and one from Massachusetts, I think, and so that's another possibility. Some outsiders. What friends? Where did he meet these people? Were these, this is all up in the air whether that's real or not, and so the investigation is kind of still continuing, although the media doesn't want to pay much attention to it. And so, and we, and also we still don't know who, uh, planted the two bombs on January the 6th at the DNC headquarters and the RNC headquarters in D.C. That's also another mystery that the FBI has not been able to solve so far. So at any rate, that's kind of the state of that play, and we have to keep our eye on that. And so I'll be wrapping this up for now. And of course, I'll be posting this both on YouTube and Rumble, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. So this is all for now.